And we are also so thrilled to be celebrating the publication of the Confession of Copeland Cane, which I have right here. It's a wonderful book. And we're really thrilled to be co-presenting with the Bay Area Book Festival and Unnamed Press. And it is now my honor to introduce our two speakers for this evening, Dr. Keenan Norris and Dr. Michael Datcher. Keenan Norris is a novelist, essayist, and short story writer. He holds an MFA from Mills College and a PhD from the University of California, Riverside. Keenan was a 2017 Marin Headlands Artist in Residence and has garnered a Public Voices Fellowship, a Callaloo Fellowship, and 2 Yerba Buena Center for the Arts Fellowships. He teaches American literature and creative writing at San Jose State University and serves as a guest editor for the Oxford African American Studies Center. He is the editor of the seminal Street Lit, representing the urban landscape. And Keenan's short work has appeared in numerous forms, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, Los Angeles Times, Alta, Pop Matters, Boom, a Journal of California, and several anthologies of California literature. Dr. Michael Datcher did his undergraduate work at UC Berkeley, his master's at UCLA, and his PhD at UC Riverside in English literature. He's the author of Ferguson area historical novel Americus and the critically acclaimed New York Times bestseller Raising Fences, a Today Show Book Club Book of the Month pick. The film rights were originally optioned by actor Will Smith's Overbrook Productions, who hired Datcher to write the screenplay. Datcher has made many other media appearances, including Oprah, and Datcher is the author of the 2020 Pulitzer Prize nominee, Animating Black and Brown Liberation, A Theory of American Literatures. We are so honored to have both of you here with us this evening. And now, please take it away, Dr. Datcher.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And hello and welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival. Again, I'm Dr. Michael Datcher, the moderator for this exciting and inspiring conversation with Keenan Norris, author of the Confession of Copeland Cane, which was officially published today. Always an exciting time when there's a pub date for an author. So thank you so much for joining us. So I'm endeavoring to have a conversation today with, I'm just going to call him Keenan, who's Dr. Norris to me, with Keenan about his brand new book, which again was published today. And so you may see us kind of going back and forth in a somewhat informal conversational tone during this conversation. So let's dive into the conversation, Keenan.
Absolutely.
So the protagonist of your novel, The Confession of Copeland Cane, who goes by Cope at times, at one point he says, books change your mind, but they can't change shit in the world. Then a couple of pages later, you have him saying writing wouldn't change the world, at least not for Black folks, but I lay low and played my role. I kept writing. What is the role of literature in social justice? What can literature do?
That's a great question. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. I sincerely, just appreciate everybody who is on this call and everybody who is, helped me to bring this book forward. I'll get to my thank yous, I guess, at the end, but I really want to start with that. Michael, to your question, so what is the role of writing in social justice, in social protest? I think that its role fluctuates, right? I think that there are essentially Black Swan events where, we're writing throughout history, and in the current day has substantially influenced and changed the trajectory of societies. That said, I think what Cope is speaking to is also is the more dominant and consistent reality, which is that generally a lot of words get spilled on the page, right? And they're beautiful and they are provocative, and they are moving in toward the cause of justice, toward some just cause, but that in itself doesn't mean that things are going to change, right? And we just think about how much I don't know how much ink has been spilled, in regards to say like police brutality and the unjust killing of unarmed Black people in America, and really throughout the Americas, right? And how little literature and the other arts have really been able to affect positive change in that regard. Somebody like Cope is really speaking from that position, and from that really consistent reality. So I would just start there, that it's that social change is unpredictable, but that generally, right, it's other things that really end up impacting societies. And so Cope looks not only to the written word, but also well beyond it for, to create social change within his little area of East Oakland, but also to even save himself. Right.
Correct. And to put some pressure on part of your response when you said that, well, there's been lots of ink spilled on pages that have not been able to, at a mass level, create change. When you look at books like How to Be an Anti-Racist, for example, which basically it's undeniably, literally changed the social political landscape, certainly of this country, with so many organizations implementing anti-racist policies. Your own novel features, I don't want to give too much of the novel away for those who haven't read it, features a character who's involved in sparking a social movement, and that plays a major role in the last part of the book. So we place some pressure on this response, which you just said to me in this audience, that, well, despite the ink that's been spilled, we cannot say that writing has had a significant impact on social justice. I want to have you respond a little bit more to that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a tension in the book. Yeah. Thank you for giving me a chance to warm up a little bit. So, I think there's a tension in the book, right, between social stasis and social change, right? There's a tension in the book between, between writing and, the unwritten world, right? There's a tension between Cope, the kind of capitalist materialist, right, and Cope, who is, at various points gets activated to create some kind of change, right? And so there is this, and so he has this love-hate relationship with the written word, to widen it out, right? Black folks, we have in many ways a complicated relationship to literature. There's a lot of scholarship, around the idea that, that Black people sought to prove our, humanity and our, that we were deserving of all the rights and privileges of American society and, Western civilization and so forth through utilizing the written word, right? And you see this in a lot of African-American literature scholarship, especially back in the 80s and 90s. That was a dominant, idea. And so, so we have that, right? We have Black folks utilizing that. At the same time, I can speak as somebody who worked for 13 years in total, 9 years full-time as a community college instructor teaching English. I can also, tell you that the written word, the English language, standard English is a gateway, and gates not only open, they also close, and they stay closed oftentimes. And so English and the written word in general has oftentimes been leveraged against Black folks. Right. To keep us out of spaces, and to deny us justice.
Nice. Certainly, we have seen writing literature weaponized against Black folk, how we speak it, how we write it, within the so-called accepted or normal paradigm that would, for example, win awards or be accepted in certain types of contexts. Thank you for that. Running plays a major role in this novel as well, including young Copeland running races against the other young characters in the book. Copeland running races as a high school 400-meter star. Then finally, of course, Copeland running a race for his life as a fugitive after the murder of Officer Burgeon. So please speak to the intersection of race as a socio-political construct and running of races in this novel.
Oh, thank you for that question. I love that question, especially just a few days after the NCAA track and field championships and a few days before the track and field Olympic trials. I love this question at this moment in sports time. As you can tell, I might know a thing or two about track and field, and and that being one of my passions. It was. I've long thought about the ways in which running is a metaphor for numerous kind of things in life. Like we can think back to Invisible Man and the that message that he gets, right? When he gets his not college diploma, but when he gets into college after the battle royal, and just all the kinds of ways within literature. I'm thinking about like Haruki Murakami's book on running and writing and so forth. And of course, race has is this double entendre, right? And so, what does running have to do with race? I mean, I think that one, there's just this way that like Cope is, even before he's literally on the run as a fugitive, he's in a way always been on the run, right? Have this, we learn early on in the book that, he was put into the California gang database upon his birth.
Right.
That's not fiction. Right. And so and just to put a period on that, right? The California gang database has actually, been used in exactly that fashion for many, many Black and brown children at their birth. Right. So based on zip code and so forth. And so, from so from jump, right, he's running from a lot of, institutional perils. And then we just think about like Black folks and, how we came not only to this country, but to the Americas in general, and the ways that we've been like trying to find higher ground, been kind of compelled to, to move and so forth. One of the big themes of this book is gentrification, and, gentrification is basically compelling, people of lower income to, move to go find somewhere else to live. And, Cope and his family and his neighborhood is under that pressure. Right. And so there's that as well. That's another way in which running plays a role. But I wanted it to be just like your question about literature. I wanted this to kind of have a two-sidedness to it. Right? So Cope also finds a certain salvation in his own running, right? His own when he starts to run track, right? It's a way of him, finding a way out of just this extremely polarized political debate that has inserted him into it, that he didn't like willingly insert himself into, but that has been imposed upon him. He thinks it's, when he got to the private school that it's imposed upon him and he's supposed to like be the spokesperson, but it's really, much before that, right? It's, it's really something that he was born into. And by going, running is, and you don't have to like, be running the 100 meters at the Olympic trials to know this. You could, if you jog, if you do any kind of, treadmill, Stairmaster, all that stuff, that running, movement, locomotion, can be a, deeply internal and peaceful, way of, moving, of spending time with yourself and of moving through the world. And so running also allows Cope to really just, get in touch with himself, to be within himself, and to cleave away all these discourses, these imposed modes of being that others have placed upon him and that society itself has placed upon him.
Mm-hmm. In the novel, people run fast. In the early part of the book, there's the young people, when Cope is probably in elementary or maybe junior high school, they are racing. People like Free in the book are very fast. In the vernacular sense, the fast life, at least in the Black context, is a thing that is very attractive to people. Or when it's in a gendered context, when young women at times are assertive in their sexuality, they at times are labeled fast. This girl is fast, right? At least certainly in my neighborhood when I was coming up. And so it seems as if running fast or being fast is both liberatory, but also carries with it certain types of dangers that can have one running fast into a thing, into a situation, into a context that one cannot extricate.
Yeah. That's really well put. I think, just kind of thinking about, again, that duality, right? It also, my father was a track runner. Some people on this call know this, but I'll say it anyway. So, he was a track runner, he was a sprinter, and he was pretty successful at the high school and college levels. And so I saw with it, with him, I was born, well after he was done with that part of his life, but I saw in his, recounting of his memories around that, both sides of that coin, at least as it functions for, for a young Black man, right? And how on the one hand, it got him out of the ghetto, right? It got him out of the west side of Chicago and able to, go to private schools and so forth. But at the same time, right, it also started to, lock him into an identity that really, really wasn't the totality of who he was, right? And I think a lot of young Black men, right, of varying athletic abilities get locked into that, because of stereotype, basically, and people expecting us to be athletic and so forth. And so, I think that, and athletics being such a, athletics being like it's fast money, right? At least that's the perception. It's like you can get, you get in the NBA or something, you get rich real quick, right? And you can kind of jump these, these steps that have, traditionally have like historically barred Black people oftentimes, right? So I think about, all that. I think about, there's a great line in Fences where, where the dad, says to his son, he doesn't want his son to, go play baseball or football. And he says, Josh Gibson's daughter is running around and, I just saw her out in the street here running around barefoot. These coaches are lying to you. They're not going to do anything for you. Right. And so there's this way that it's also like sports is oftentimes dangled in front of Black people in lieu of, more practical, means of social ascent. And so there's a lot of so there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of problematics that, that go along with a lot of our attempts at, uplift and success and so forth. And so I wanted the book to kind of get into that as Cope, attempts to move social classes, to show how like there's a two-sidedness to every movement that he makes.
Right, and the book does a great job at articulating that duality, which I'll jump into in a moment. But first, you mentioned father, so I want to dive into this next part of the conversation. One of the most interesting parts of the novel is that the father, Copeland's father, is an inventor. There's a backstory to that, but that's such an interesting occupation for an African-American father, especially in a novel. You don't find very many inventor fathers,
right?
Black male fathers in the neighborhood inventing stuff. And that, in fact, that particular positioning leads in part to Cope ending up incarcerated in the youth control, which is the novel's kind of juvenile incarceration unit. So what role does inventiveness, or you can think of it as improvisation in many ways, play in Black liberation struggles, both in this novel, but also in the world at large for Black folk?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's like really ironic that, all the indices and the studies and so forth say that, Black people are, not entrepreneurial enough. We don't,
right.
Black Americans who are not, recently immigrated from Africa, right? That we're not entrepreneurial enough. We don't open up enough businesses, right. Right? Really, it's like a lack of capital and and so forth, right? People need money, but but I think that's really ironic, right? That like critique, because we've had to be so inventive just to, back in the day, just to survive, oftentimes today, just to survive, and to get ahead. Like, you talk to most Black people who are middle class, upper class, economically, and there's, at least in my experience, there's some story along the way of somebody who had to, for lack of a better term, entrepreneur. That
Negro level. Whoa, you went there with it.
Right. And so so Cope's dad is just part of that, right? He's just part of that, that tradition. I've just literalized it, by making him an inventor, right? Cope says something like, that, with all the tests and experiments we done had ran on us, right? How could he, be anything but an inventor?
Yeah, and we see this play out again in Black vernacular usage in the Black community, certainly with phrases like making $1 out of 15 cents. You try that for inventiveness. We're making lemonade out of a lemon, which is, in terms of its pop culture reference, Beyonce's album Lemonade. I was never really a great Beyonce fan. After that album dropped, just the courage of that album, the inventiveness of that album, the artistry of that album made me a Beyonce fan. I never bought her earlier stuff. Beyonce is bad. Let's keep it real. But, I wouldn't have bought a Beyonce album. After that album, I was like, whoa, right? And that she labeled the album Lemonade, which was completely a reference to making a lemonade out of a lemon, her situation with her spouse and those complicated fun dynamics. And so I was thinking about that as I was reading that part of the book and thinking about inventiveness and what it takes to live a Black life, certainly in the context of atomizing, virulent anti-Blackness. You have to be inventive, not just to start your own business, but literally survival takes a certain level of inventiveness. And we see a long tradition of that via our vernacular usage with phrases like making lemonade out of a lemon. You also spoke, you mentioned earlier in our conversation, Keenan, about gentrification playing a major role in this book, and it does to a great extent. Can you say more about how the displacement of Black folk impacts Black characters in your novel, but also impacts Black folks really around the country?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Oakland side yesterday ran, they were, nice enough to run a feature piece on my novel, and they focused on the gentrification aspect of it, which is, one of the real driving points of the narrative that really is like catalyze, helps to catalyze, the plot of the book, and the main crisis of the book. So the book takes place in Oakland, right? And takes place in East Oakland. I myself am not from Oakland. I'm from Southern California, from the Inland Empire, but I've lived in Oakland for I live in San Leandro, but Oakland area, for almost 20 years now, and I lived in Oakland for first half of that. Also have a lot of family that lives in East Oakland and that came here during the Great Migration out of the South, and that's when most Black people who live in Oakland and in the East Bay came here, right? So we've seen really, especially in the last, in Oakland, I'd say in the last 10, 15 years, this really, massive gentrification, especially of the downtown and of North Oakland. There are people on this call who can speak to this, who are native to Oakland, who can speak to this even more than I can, right? But because that gentrification spoke, so deeply to me in terms of it's, it related so closely to some of these other issues that we're talking about, like having to run, like having to make something, out of nothing and so forth. Like it was unavoidable. And here in the Bay Area, right here in the East Bay, it's totally unavoidable, right? And because it's a force that not only marginalizes and oppresses Black folks, but the vast majority of people, right? Poor people, people of modest means, people of middle class, right? There's a shrinking, deeply shrinking middle class here in the Bay Area. Because of all that, I wanted to center much of the book around this issue. The book's also kind of premised on a thought experiment, which is, so the book is set in 2030, I should say. It's set in the near future. So it's speculative fiction, like not that speculative, but so it's premised on this thought experiment, right? What if the gentrification that is like in full effect downtown, and so forth, was in East Oakland? And apparently it's up for debate exactly where East Oakland starts, and everybody knows where it ends, but where it begins. But wherever you think it begins, right? Since people have different answers to that, or imagine that the gentrification that you see in downtown was starting to root just as deeply in East Oakland, or even deep East Oakland, right? Because Cope lives in what would be like the 70s for people who are familiar with East Oakland. So imagine if that was that deeply rooted in that part of Oakland, right? 12th Avenue. See, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, Derek. That's about where I would say East Oakland starts. Anyway. Right. I'm gonna get in trouble.
That's everywhere. That's all of Oakland. That's fine.
I'm gonna get in trouble. So anyway, so just imagine that, right? So Cope, says that the story that they've been sold all the way to the wrecking balls is that his housing complex, Rockwood, is the last housing project in East Oakland, right? He says, get it right. We live in an apartment complex, not a housing project, right? But, for a variety of reasons, it is slated for demolition by the time that he's 18 years old. The present tense of the story in 2030. And so what effects does that have? We know what's going on, downtown and so forth. We know about just tech's, big tech's impact on the average person in the Bay Area in general. But imagine, that impact, pushed even further east within Oakland itself.
Yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned throughout the book, I think a really clever way about the liberating force of literacy. You have some really subtle, I think, references to Frederick Douglass, who famously talks about in his autobiography about learning to read, how literacy was the foundation of his own freedom. there's also kind of an echo of Malcolm X reading when he was in prison. And so in the novel, Copeland, when they're in the youth control, which again is the novel's incarceration unit for young people, is the library's most popular user. Then at a certain point, so is DeMichael. For those who don't know, in the novel, DeMichael was like the iconic bad boy. He's the big, overaged, eventually junior high and high school student who is big and bad, who finds himself on the wrong side of various types of legalities. And so also in that library, he eventually becomes someone who embraces reading and literacy. So can you speak about the intersection of literacy and Black liberation in your novel, but also also in the world at large for Black folks?
Yeah. I mean, so, I think about somebody like a scholar like Jean Andrew Jarrett, right? And his, formulation around, like, again, Black folks taking up the pen in the 17th century, in the 18th century, in order to, prove our prove our intellect in a society that, was sought to deny that we, were fully functioning human beings. And frankly, you still see this, unfortunately, right? With the, not to go too off topic, I'll get back on topic in a second, but if folks aren't aware of, the scandal, for lack of a better word, with the NFL now, right, around the race norming of, with head trauma, right? And I'm doing a poor job of summarizing, but y'all can, look that up and, and see that, still operative to this day is, are certain assumptions around Black intellectual inferiority, right? So literature, historically has been a way for Black people to, to kind of take hold of the tools of Western civilization and to use them not against Western civilization, but to incorporate ourselves within it as, as dignified persons, who have, who are, do the same rights and privileges as everybody else. It also has been a way of like turning the rhetoric of, Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution, of America's whole, professed ideals against the power structure that, for the most part has been arrayed against those ideals. Right. And to turn it against that power structure in order to change that power structure, in order to, have, rights, privileges ceded, and so forth. And so, yeah, there's a long history of that, right? So, most of the great abolitionist work are, the slave narratives, right? We know more slave narratives than we do speeches, right? Most of you probably know more about what Frederick Douglass wrote than what he said, right? Same for Olaudah Equiano, Harriet Jacobs, Mary Prince, Josiah Henson, on and on, right? So there's that. And even in more recent times, we can step well beyond slavery. I think about Richard Wright in his memoir, right? Black Boy, incompletely titled Black Boy, really, entitled American Hunger, where, Black folks are still barred from going to from using the public library in Memphis during Jim Crow, and he has to, get this subversive Irishman, to lend him his library card, or excuse me, out there to get books from the library and bring them to him. Right. And so there's a, there's a long history of that. Right. And then, in Cope's time, right, he's not literally, legally barred from reading, but in myriad ways, right? Life of the mind, has to come in, is secondary to, just making $1, to, trying to keep he and his family's heads above water, right? And so it's ironic that, like Malcolm X, far too many Black men, right? It's not until he's incarcerated that he really has time, ironically, to really, explore his mind, right? And so you have that, that irony. I think what's different, Cope is very ambivalent about writing. He's not really, so ambivalent about reading, right? Reading is really a portal for him to understand different lives, to place himself in the shoes, for lack of a better phrase, in the shoes of other people who've come before him, especially these Black people who've come before him, and to think, about how he would react to, living in their times and having to face the challenges that they face. And so, reading in many ways is salvific, for him.
Yeah, so. That's right. Can I have, of course, many questions to ask, but I do want to offer the audience a chance to enter the discussion now. I'd love to hear what people are thinking. I mean, those who especially know Dr. Norris in particular, who may know some of the origins of this novel, his own love for track and field. I was a miler, so I was, of course, drawing all the track and field references, and a big track and field cat myself. But I wanted to let people in the audience who are listening in chime in, because I know that we have a lot of smart people who are interested in this novel and probably have really insightful questions to ask. I'm just going to pause talking right quick, give people a chance to speak on up. So if you're in the chat, please start chatting. If not, I'll continue. But I do want to take a little moment for just a pause in case people wanted to speak on it. All right. So
while we're taking that pause, can I just maybe this is a good time to just say my thank yous real quick.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of folks on this call who, from my mom, first of all, thank you.
Mom's in the building. Let's give moms a shot.
To Dwayna, my partner, to all, the wonderful writers and writers and thinkers here, and many people who've we've been on a literary journey, together for a long time. And so I deeply appreciate all of you for going along with me on this and supporting me. So
nice. Thanks for that. Yeah, I love it when moms can show up for you. That's a blessing, brother. Thank you for your mother for representing. So we had planned to have Mariko, I think, be the question adjudicator. So let me see if we can, if that's what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you're ready.
Right. Do folks have any questions for us, Mariko?
They do. They have several already in the queue, but as a reminder to the audience, please just use that Q&A box to submit many more if you'd like. So the first question, I'm actually going to combine a couple of audience questions because I think they kind of flow into the same ideas. So these are from Dr. Merrill Kravitz and from Carmen Kennedy. And together these questions say, I know that your own personality is sometimes reflected in your characters. Is that the case in the Confession of Copeland Cane? And sort of as a follow-up, or more generally, what inspiration did you draw upon for that character?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think there are parts of me. I'm definitely not Cope. And for folks who know me and read half a page of Cope, y'all know that I'm not Cope. But but there are definitely parts of me that are are in Cope. I think that while Cope speaks differently than I do, the playfulness with language, his playfulness with language and his curiosity with language, and his love of literature, and his ability to write in multiple voices and to write in a voice that's like a hybrid of how he speaks and how other people speak, I think is, very much like, comes from me. Some of the stuff around track and field. And yeah, I also think like some of his interactions when he's, when he goes to Piedmonte High School are informed by some of my experiences. So yeah, I mean, I'd say that there are definitely some points of convergence or whatever. Fortunately for me, we're different in other ways. So, but I think part of what I wanted to do in writing Cope's character was to imagine, how a kid who, has certain challenges that are like not particularly unique, and who also has like but on the other hand, also has a lot of like talents and even like some, familial supports and communal supports, still has so many things arrayed against him because of the, all the problems that, unfortunately plague our society, and especially plague those who are racially and economically marginalized, that he could still, end up in, the kind of situation he ends up in.
As a quick side note, I see in the the attendees list, Ruben Mendoza, which I think is a reference to our time at Riverside. So I know that Ben has something to say as someone who knows Brother Keenan well. So I wouldn't be surprised if he just dropped like some knowledge and you guys wanted to replace me with him as the moderator. But I want to place so much pressure right now, Dr. Mendoza. So I see him representing. So, but I want to go back to America, who already has questions in her queue. So jump on in there.
All right. This is another combination of two questions from Christine Sue and from Emmerich. They ask, what gave you the most pleasure in the process of writing the book? Was there a part of the novel that felt the most electrifying to write, or that flowed really easily as you were writing it? And conversely, what was the most difficult part about writing this book?
Those are great questions. Thank you again for the questions. I mean, I love Cope, just straight up. Cope is a combination of many people that I've known and some things I know about myself, right? But he's a combination of many people that I've known throughout my life. And so, just like Cope's voice kind of coming out of the ether and, and suggesting itself to me. And then, and just the voice itself, I think like the first 50 pages, I was just really like, just tapping into the voice and into these, neighborhood stories and so forth. That was by far the most fun part of the book. I want to say while I'm here, especially because this is a MoAD event, that one of the great institutional supports that I had in writing this book was a Callaloo Writers Workshop Fellowship. Callaloo is an international writers workshop. And I was part of their 2016 fellows, along with a number of other really great writers. And, we met at Brown University, for a couple of weeks. And I, really went through the first 30, 40 pages of this, of this text, with those folks, people like Nafisa Thompson Spires, Tony Ann Johnson, right? And other people who, are going to be published in the future as well. And, and so I'm Amanda Chu Kwan, and so forth, right? And so so that was a great, just wind in my sails. I forget sorry, I'm can come back to the question. I wanted to say that piece about Callaloo, and I kind of forgot what the question was.
Most electrifying, pleasing, or difficult parts of writing the novel. And I just want to jump in and correct my own pronunciation of our audience member who asked that question. It's Christine Shu, so apologies for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mariko. So, that first part of the book where I, just like that initial inspiration, and I know, because there are a lot of writers here, I don't know if my process is similar or different from you guys, but, I really kind of start just from, not with like, I don't need the whole thing planned out. I just need to know what my next couple steps are, when I'm writing. And I just knew I had these stories that I wanted to tell, and that, that they might make a book, they might make a novel, or maybe they just be individual short stories, right? I actually did publish a section of the first part of the book entitled Race as a short story, maybe like 2 years ago. And so that was just really fun. Vibing with the brothers and sisters at Callaloo was wonderful. In terms of the most difficult part, so one of the people who's also on this call, who I definitely need to give my thank yous to, is the editor who I worked with at Unnamed Press, Chris Heiser. Thanks, Chris, who really helped me hone like the plot mechanics of the book. And so getting the, just the pace and the kind of funneling the dramatic tension of the book. I knew how it was going to end and so forth, but, making that move a little more expeditiously was quite a challenge. So, just because there are a lot of things, Cope's life, in a way, like the police brutality, police murder issue that catalyzes Cope's drama is not, it really, it's like the core of the story, but it's not. Like the story is really about Cope's life, right? Just like all these, Black men and women who, have died unjustly, at the hands of the police, right? What we know about them is how they died. And that in itself is such a severe injustice, right? It's such a severe injustice to them because they were people, right? They weren't just dead bodies, right? They weren't just a murder scene, right? They were people. And so I wanted to, tell Cope's whole story. And in doing that, right, a story is not, doesn't necessarily lend itself, so easily to like arriving at a moment of climactic, dramatic, stuff. And so that part was like devilishly hard to do. So.
All right. More audience questions. These are great questions. Keep them going. You guys should be in control of this discussion. I'm about to retire from my role as the moderator. Let the audience just take control.
All right. Well, our next question, a few questions altogether, kind of long, but I think it's really good. The short version is, what books is this book in conversation with? And from another anonymous question asker, the novel discusses a lot of institutional failures, or rather the successful weaponization of institutions against Black and Brown people. Mm-hmm. And one institution that's prevalent in the novel is private education. Right. So thinking about the rhetoric that you were discussing earlier, could you please talk about, and going back to what books is this book in conversation with, could you talk about the literary canon? How does the Confession of Copeland Cane fit into or challenge the canon, especially with how the Academy chooses which Black American writers to include?
Right. Good question.
Okay.
Today, I'm about to shut my thing down. Like, I
definitely need to answer this one in 5 words or fewer. No, just kidding.
Right. 3 words.
I'll make it a haiku. Yeah, I mean, I think. Okay. So, let me see. Books that it's in conversation with. That's tricky because I don't want to. I know I'm supposed to be selling my book and all, but it's a little bit of a, reach to say it's, I don't know, in conversation with, with a book penned by, I don't know, one of my literary heroes. But what I would say is that books that I was thinking about, and I guess having a mental conversation around when I was, writing it, books like Invisible Man, books like Paul Beatty's The Sellout, books like Mitchell Jackson's The Residue Years, a wide range of books. And those are books written by Black men. There are a lot of books, written by, folks who weren't Black, that also influenced me as well. But it's kind of hard to come off right off top with with the book list. But, given more time, you can email me. I can,
Just hit me up. I'll let you know what's going on.
In terms of the canon and how it, maybe resist the canon. Yeah, I mean, I was not afraid with Cope's voice of like some patches of the book reading a little rough, I think there's a way, again, that standard English, and I say this again with a lot of bona fides, right? I have, for lack of a better term, enforced, might even say policed, right? The use of standard English through, teaching English 1A, 1B, through teaching remedial classes. And that is, no two ways about it. It is a barrier, not only to, and it's an intentional gateway, set up not only, for Black folks, but for, people of color in general. And so I think that, that in, insisting on Cope's voice, insisting on its irregularity, insisting on its inconsistency, because it's also not like Cope is incapable of standard English, right? He's going back and forth, right? Depending on situation, depending on mood, et cetera. So just insisting on the uniqueness and non-standardization of his voice, I think that in itself is a challenge to, to a lot of staid ideas around literature. Okay, there was a back half to that question. That was a super complicated and great question. Was there anything else I didn't cover?
I think that was great. And I'm also eager to get to our next question, which is from Dr. Ruben Mendoza himself, asking, could you maybe speak to dystopian literature in relation to this being near future or speculative, and what sounds like dystopian?
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing is about, when you think about speculative fiction or even science fiction and all, you think about or at least my initial reference probably from when I was a kid, or aliens and UFOs and stuff like that. But the thing is, speculative fiction can literally be about what's around the corner, right? What's, just in the offing. And that's what I wanted to write about was a near future that, is not our present reality, is not Oakland's present reality, but, very well may be on the trajectory, right? I'd love to be proven wrong about everything in this book. I'd love for this book to be totally obsolete and, and without relevance, in a few years. Maybe my publisher would disagree with that, but that is my state, that is my stated wish, is that this is, that some of these societal trends, reverse, disappear in some sort of way, or change in some sort of way. But so speculative fiction, allows, in the case of this book, it allows a forewarning. I think you kind of feel that in books like Parable of the Sower, right? You read Parable of the Sower, and a lot of it feels very present now, I have a friend who has a shirt that says Octavia Butler was right. And so, so I think, so I think for me, at least, the most kind of powerful dystopian literature is that literature that, is only hard to imagine because we're scared of it.
There's probably time for one last question. So choose the best one, Miracle.
All right. Well, I'm going to cheat and combine several into one, but they all pertain to the writing life, the writing process. How long did it take to write this book? And how do you find time to remain creative in your writing while maintaining a busy schedule? And finally, how do you take care of your mental health as you write about trauma and violence?
Okay, there's a lot. So let's see. It took me 5 or 6 years to write this book. So I started writing the book really in the wake of the police murders of Walter Scott, of Eric Garner, and Laquan McDonald, and many other unarmed Black people. Unfortunately, what happened in 2020 happened in 2020, and there was like this newfound, kind of resurgent American awareness, around this, unfortunately, age-old American issue. But that's where I started writing the book, and I finished it, I don't know, a few months ago, right? So that's how long it took. My writing process, I don't like write on a certain schedule. I don't want to say I just write when I'm inspired to write. But I think it's important to, at least for me, and going to like mental health and so forth, to not like put an artificial burden on myself. Like I have to write 5 pages a day or, 500 words a day or something. That's not how I've ever written. Honestly, I have like a sincere belief in myself that I'm a writer, that I've always been a writer, and I'll always be a writer. And so, so I feel like if I'm not inspired to write at the moment, or it's not coming to me right now, like I just need to put it away and come back to it later, whether that be, a day, a month, a few months from now. Right. So, so I'd say that, and that I think also goes to that last part, around mental health, because there are certain times that I think it is good to engage with difficult subjects, and there's times when it's like not good to do that, right? Where where we need to give ourselves, where we deserve, time away from that and time to, just enjoy life, right? And so, so the first thing to do is like, I don't force myself to write, as don't. I also think it's like just important, like community is important. Writing community is important, right? As writers, we face a lot of rejection. We face a lot of like false starts and, and so forth. And just, breaks in the process. And so it's really important to support each other, and like, therapy ain't bad either. So
That's right. Listen, thank you so much for this time, for this conversation. I know we have many writers and creatives in this audience. Let me just say this aloud, because when someone's book comes out, like today is Keenan Norris's publication day. We call it the Pub Day. And that example serves as such an inspiration to folks who have stories inside of them, probably folks who are on this Zoom call as we speak. So let me encourage all of you to keep that dream alive. We do face a great deal of rejection as writers. It's very difficult to break through the malaise of the publishing industry, but it can be done. And today, we have an example of someone who's broken through, who's made a way out of no way, made some lemonade out of a living. That is the publishing industry. Thank you once again for Dr. Keenan Norris. Congratulations on this brand new book, The Confession of Copeland Cane.